Okay, too. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra Daf Chav Tes Bava Basra 29, and it's dedicated for a Yeshua for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shuyim, and Shemira for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. We're going to start on the bottom of Chav Ches on the base, 4 lines from the bottom. Gemara has told us that there is something called a Cheskas Raya, that you could bring a Chazaka, bring a proof that something is yours from the fact that you've been living there for a certain number of years, and you claim you got it in a permitted manner. And the fact that you lived there for 3 years and nobody objected, that's a proof. So it's based upon the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, well, according to Rabbi Yishmael's position in the Mishnah, what's his source for this idea? Rabbi Yishmael is based upon the idea of a shor hamuad, that there's an ox that gores 3 times, and you have to pay full damages. Rabbi Yishmael is saying that it doesn't need to be continuously 3 years, that it can be a shorter period. It has to be 3 seasons. But the Gemara has also the position of the Rabbanan, which we assume has to be 3 complete years. So what's the source for the Rabbanan's position? Or Rabbanan Mai? What's the source for the Rabbanan's position that a Chazaka is established after 3 years? So Amar Rav Yosef's explanation is Kroksiv. It's a verse. It says by Jeremiah, Sados Bakesef Yiknu, V'chasuv V'sefer V'chasom. Jeremiah told the people in the 10th year of Tzidkiyahu's reign, he told his fellow Israelites, fellow Jewish people, he said, well, he was lying in the prison. He says, buy the fields and acquire it and write it in the sefer and seal it. And the Gemara continues, Shari Navi Omeid Be'eser Umasir al Chasasrei. And the prophet Jeremiah was standing in the 10th year and warning about the 11th year. Let's just pause for a moment. Jeremiah is sitting there in prison. He's prophesizing about the impending destruction, and yet he tells people what you're supposed to do now is go out, buy documents, write it down, because even though we're going to be exiled, we're going to be coming back. But you're not going to be able to establish a chazaka because you're going to be exiled from the year in the 11th year, and so therefore you won't have 3 years. You only have the 10th and the 11th years. So he says you have to plan for the future. We'll be coming back, and what a tremendous amount of faith that Jeremiah was saying that get it, sign it, and notarize it because this is going to be legitimately yours. The prophet Jeremiah was standing in the 10th year and warning about the 11th year. And so we see from here there was only 2 years of a chazakah. Abaye says that's not a proof. Maybe he's just giving them good advice. Basically have a contract because you don't want to have to rely upon the chazakah gathering witnesses. It's always easier to have the actual deed. Because if you're not going to say this, or on the top of 29a, Jeremiah had stated in an earlier prophecy, he had said, Benu batim v'shevu v'nitu ganos v'yachuas piryan. He said, build houses and dwell in them and plant gardens and eat their fruits. Now, Jeremiah sent this message to those that were in Babylon who had been exiled with Yechaniah 11 years prior to Tzidkiyahu. He told them to build the houses because they're going to be stuck there for 70 years. So why would he have to warn them about this? So he's giving them good advice. He's telling them, I'm giving you good advice because, and the commentaries explain, because they might have thought they shouldn't do this because it's only a mitzvah in the land of Israel. So he's telling them, no, I'm giving you good advice. Even though it's not a mitzvah, you should still do it. So we see from here that Jeremiah is just dispensing good advice. So maybe all he's doing is giving good advice. Mar says, maybe, Hachinami, it's a Tova Kamashmon. And Teda, I'll prove to you that it's just good advice. He says, after you write these contracts, put it in a pottery utensil to preserve it properly. So that the deed will remain. Now, do you think that Jeremiah has to tell them the proper way to store their document, that keep it in a kli cheres? No, he's giving them good advice. That's all he's doing. All he's doing is giving them good advice. So therefore, that cannot be the proof. Ela Marava, what's the proof for the Rabbanan that 3 years established in the Chazaka? Shata Kamaisa Machol Inish. Tarti machil plus or machil. First year, a person will waive his rights to the property if somebody else is using it. Second year, will waive it. The third year already, he's not going to waive it. So Amarei Abaye. So therefore, after 3 years, since he wouldn't have waived it after the third year, there after 3 years, it's going to belong to the person who was squatting there. So the Gemara says, so Abaye responds to Rava al mi'ata ki hadra ara the other barmi pere. If that's the case, let's say after the first 2 years, he proves that it's his, and the guy has to return the land. If according to you, he says that the first and second year he's waived his rights, and let him return it without the fruits because he waived the rights. Alama Rav Nachman, Hadra Arav, Hadra Peri. Why does Rav Nachman say that if it's returned before the 3 years, that he returns it with the fruits? But if the guy waived the rights to the fruits, why is he getting the fruits back? So therefore, Rava has to give a different answer. Shata Kamaisa lo kapit inish. Tarti lo kapit, plus kapit. The first and second years, not that a person waives his rights, but he won't be bothered to protest over it because it's a pain in the neck. Got to take the guy to a small claims court or whatever. He's not going to protest. He's going to let it go. But by the third year, as it's going on, he's going to protest. And so therefore, for that reason, that's the source for the idea of 3 years. So the Gemara says, Abaye explains, well, if that's the case, Omiata could go on Hani, the Bay Bar al Yashiv, the Kapti, Afil Amad the Mitzra. Well, what about these people from the family of Bar al Yashiv that they protest even on somebody who's just walking on their boundary line? Afil Amad the Mitzra Didayo. They have a very low threshold for protesting. You won't mean to say from the fact that they didn't protest immediately, that proves that it's a chazaka for them right away. And if you want to say indeed, that proves that it's a chazaka for them right away. So then everybody's going to have their own amounts, and that's not the way we do things in the Gemara. We have one amount, and if you're going to say, well, the Bar al Yasha, from the fact that they didn't protest right away, that proves that's a chazaka against them, but then everybody's going to have their own amounts. So Rava gives a different answer. Shata kamaisa mizdar inish b'shtare. Tarte utlas mizdar. The first year, the second year, the third year, the person will be watching his contract. Tfelo mizdar. We don't make you watch your contract for more than 3 years. It's too hard. So if the guy has a deed, after 3 years, we don't make you watch it. So therefore, after 3 years, it's logic that the chazaka is established. So it says Abaye, Amroi Abaye, Me'ata, if that's the case, if that's the case, if he's objecting, if the person who is now the deed holder and another person was squatting on his property, but he made a objection not in the presence of the person who was squatting, it shouldn't count. Because the guy who was squatting could say, well, listen, if you had made your objection in front of me, I would have preserved the deed. But you didn't make your objection in front of me. So therefore, why do we say it's a valid deed if the whole purpose was to notify the guy to keep his contract? Mar explains, no, even though he didn't make it right in front of him, the Amrway, Chaver, it's like your friend has a friend. Chaver, it's like, and the friend of your friend has a friend, you would have heard about it. If this guy was objecting and saying that you're not living in your house properly, the word would have got back to you. Amar Avuna, Shanim Sha'amru, Husha Achan Ritzufos. These 3 years which they spoke about, that you establish a chazaka, Ravuna said that's where you're staying in the land continuously. It has to be 3 years in a row. And if it's not 3 years in a row, it's not establishing a chazaka. Mar's first question is, Micah Mashwan, what's Ravuna even telling us? Tanina, isn't this an explicit Mishnah that we learned? That the proof is where you have 3 straight years from every single day. So why does Rav Huna have to say what's explicit Mishnah? So Gemara says, no, Ma'alatema, you might have thought. Oh wait, I wanted to pause for a moment. That when we came to the phrase above, that Rashi says, L'kamam b'shmait, and it will be explained further on. But that is right after that. It says Ad Kan Perish Rashi. That's what Rashi puts down his pen. And according to the Gilyon, it says Adkan Rashi Zatzal Mace, that Rashi, our teacher died at this point. So basically, Kan Mace Rashi, this is where Rashi died. So basically, this is a very powerful moment that we're transitioning from Rashi. He can no longer write, but his grandson Rashbam picks up the pen in Rashi's place. Okay, so now back to our Gemara. The Gemara said, why does Rafun have to tell us it needs to be 3 years in a row? And it's an explicit Mishnah. Chaskasan shalosh miyom l'yom. So Gemara said, no, that Mishnah wouldn't be enough. He might have said miyom l'yom lafuke mekuta os u'la'olam afil mefuzaros. You might have said when it needs to be every single day. It means to say that it can't be partial years, but if the years are spread out, that would be okay. So we're saying Kamash one, no, if the years are spread out, it's not okay. So, but comes along Rav Chama, he says, "Modi Rav Huna ba'asrei de muvri bagi." So he says, but Rav Huna would admit that in a place where people have the practice to leave the field fallow for a year, that's considered continuous. That that's not considered a break. So Gemara says, well, that's obvious. Pshita, of course, if he's using it in the proper manner, that's not going to be considered a break. There's a question whether or not the actual year where he doesn't foul, where he leaves a foul, okay, it's not going to be, it's not a break, but is that counted as part of the 3 years? That's a different question. But everybody would agree if you're using the proper manner, it's not going to be considered a break. So Gemara says, no, it's Shricha the Ika. No, we're talking about a case where some people leave the land fallow and some don't. V'hai gavra muvra, and this man leaves it fallow. Ma'al you might have said, he said, he might have said that the person who was making the claim that he's squatting on his land said, if it was really yours, you should have planted it so that you could establish your chazaka earlier. Kamash Malan. No, the guy who was squatting can say, the Amrway, I left it fallow because because one land amongst all my other fields, I don't want to have to start watching one. It's not cost effective to me to watch one field when all my other fields are lying fallow this year. And so therefore, this is why this is the Chiddush. Inami, or also alternatively, Bahacha Nicholi the Avda Tfei. Or you could say, yeah, I know. Or you could say, I know that, listen, I'm aware that I could have established a chazaka quicker, but in this case, the land will work better if I leave it fallow for a year. Tanan, so now our Mishnah says, chazkas habatim. So again, Gemara is questioning Rav Huna's law because our Mishnah says that the proof for the houses is 3 years in a row. Habatim, but houses, people don't know who's staying in the house at night. You only know who's staying there in the day. So this is the question on Rav Huna because it's going to be interrupted period of time. So Amar Abaye, Man Masid Abatim. Abaye says, who is the one who testifies about the houses? Shivave, the neighbors. Well, Shivava made the yada. The mama ubalayla. The neighbors, they know what's going on. They see the lights on. They know that the guy's there day and night. Rava says, no. Could go into Asu Beitrei. The Amri, no, we're talking about a case where 2 witnesses came along and they said, Anana Grina Minei, Vidarinam Beitlashan and Biamamo Bilala. 2 witnesses come along and say, we rented it from him and we stayed there day and night. So we have 2 witnesses testifying to the fact that they were there during the day and the night. So Amrale Rav Yemor Rav Ashi, why do we believe these 2 witnesses? Hani no Gimbe Dusanhin. These 2 witnesses are no gabadaver. They have a vested interest in the matter. Because if they wouldn't testify to this, we would say to them, even though you already paid rent to the first guy, go and pay rent to the guy who's making the claim now. But your testimony is basically saying you don't have to pay that other guy rent. So why do we accept their testimony? So that's what Rav Yemer said to Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi responds, do you think these judges are judging in a non-expert manner? That they're going to accept witnesses if they already paid the rent to this person? No, for sure that's not what he's referring to. Milo Askina could go to Nikiti Agar Base. We know we're obviously talking about a case where the court is holding the rent, Amri Laman Leisve, or the person is coming with the rent to the court, and he says, "Who should I give it to?" So that's obviously the case here, and so we see from here that that's a case where the two witnesses are testifying that he had it also a day and a night. Amar Zutra v'tain v'amar leisutre sahadi sudule the darba be'ei tlashani v'yamamu b'layla tanise tana. So Mar Zutra says if the person who's making the claim and says you're on my property, if he'll make the claim and he'll say, listen, bring me two witnesses to test there 3 years, day and night, well, then that's a valid claim, and we're going to make him actually bring two witnesses, and we're not going to rely upon the fact that the neighbors just saw them there at night. So the Gemara says, Modi Mar Zutra, the Gemara says the Mar Zutra himself, who requires that if they ask, we don't make the claim from that. We don't. The court doesn't force him to bring witnesses that he was also there at night, unless the people who are bringing the claim say, also prove to me that you were there at night. But Mar Zutra himself would admit on the top of Chavtes Amabez, Berochen Amachzirim Bayaros, by if you have salesmen, perfume mongers who are walking around the towns. That case, Afagav Dlotayin Tain Anan. That even though they didn't make the claim, we'll make the claim we'll make the claim against them. Even if the person who's making the claim doesn't bring that proof, we, the court, will make this claim. And what's the reason? The reason is, Tosfos explains, because since they're not in the house for a long period of time, it's possible that when they weren't there, somebody else moved in, and therefore this guy saw somebody else moving in, and he assumed that they weren't there. And so therefore, for this reason, we see it as a very serious potential messing up of this guy's claim to be living there for 3 years. The Mechuza, and Rav Huna would admit, however, in the shops of Mechuza, that he doesn't have to be there at night, because those shops are only meant for the day and not for night, and so therefore he establishes the chazaka, because she establishes a chazaka, The question is, okay, so he doesn't have to be there at night in the store, but does he need double the amount of time to establish a chazaka? That's a debate amongst the Rishonim. Rami Bar Chama, the Rav Ukva Bar Chama, Zabanai Amta Bahadi Adadi. So Rami Bar Chama and Rav Ukva Bar Chama, they bought a maid together, and Marish Tamish Ba Rishona Shlishis Bachamiches, and Marish Tamish Ba Shnia Ravia Shishis. One had the use of her the year 1, 3, and 5. The other had the use of her years 2, 4, and 6. Nafak Irale. Then somebody else comes along with a deed and says, I'm actually the one who's entitled to this maid's work. And so they say, no, but we were using it, and we have a chazaka because we've been using her for 6 years. So also coming to Rava, they came to Rava, and Rava said to them, no, you outsmarted yourself. Because my time of disu hachi, why did you do this? That one did it 1, 3, and 5, the other one did 2, 4, and 6. So you shouldn't be able to have a chazaka against each other. So this way, neither one of you could establish chazaka. One to 1, 3, and 5, the others in 2, 4, and 6. But just like you don't have a chazaka against one against the other, so too you don't have a chazaka against the rest of the world. And this guy who's making the claim, you have no chazaka against him because your years were interrupted. The low Amr, and we only say this at the low cost of Itra, when they didn't write a partnership agreement with witnesses that this is going to be the arrangement. But if they actually wrote one of a cost of Itra, Kala Islam. But if they actually wrote a partnership agreement, then there's going to be everybody's going to know what's going on, and that'll be established a chazaka. Amarava, Achal kua chutz mi beis rova kana kua chutz mi beis rova. Let's say a person is squatting on the field and he consumes the fruits for everything except for a base rova, a small amount of the field. Well, then he's acquired everything except for the small amount of the field because he didn't use that. We only say that he hasn't proved his use of that, of his ownership of that part of the field, only when that field was capable of being plowed and he didn't plow it. But if that field was not capable of being planted, and then it explains why he left it empty, then we're going to say, then we'll say that he's actually acquired that property by virtue of the fact that he's acquired the rest of the land with his proof. So he's also got this part because this is a part that was expected not to be planted. So Maske for Bibi Barabai, for Bibi Barabai challenges this idea that he challenges Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yoshua. Again, Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yoshua said that when do we say that he acquires that field? When it was that part of the area, when it was not capable of being sown. So, but if it was capable of being sown, when do we say he has not acquired? When do we say he's acquired? He has not acquired it. When it was not, when it was capable of being planted, but when it was not capable of being planted, then he acquires it even though he didn't plant it. So Abaye says, so Rabibi, so Maska for Rabibi Bar Abaye, so Rabibi, the son of Abaye, challenges if that's the case. If you're going to say that he was not capable of acquiring it, then how would he have acquired? How did he ever acquire a rock? Meaning to say, we're just gonna repeat this again, basically. So because our friend just walked in, I want to make sure he gets it. We're in 29b. So the point is like this: Rava says that if a person lived on the land for 3 years and he used that land except for a small portion of the land called the base rova, then he's acquired the whole land. He's proof that he acquired the whole land except for that base rova, except for that part. So Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, says, when does Rava say this law? Only when that part, well, that small part that he didn't use was capable of being used for planting. But if it wasn't capable of being used for planting, then he acquired it via the whole land. He doesn't have to use every single inch because this part was not used for planting. So therefore, it's proof that he used the land. He also gets that part. So Rav Bibi, the son of Abaye, challenges Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua. He says, what are you talking about? How do you acquire a rock in general? There's a way to acquire a rock. How do you acquire the rock? You acquire the rock by doing certain things that the rock is typically used for. How? By putting animals on it, by drying your fruit on it. He could have used it. He didn't have to plant it. He could have used this rock for something else. So therefore, he rejects the teaching of Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua. He could have used this for other things. Okay. So now we have next case. The person says to his friend, my bias behind base. So what are you doing in my house? Amalei minachsa binte says I bought it from you. And I've been using it all these years. I used it for 3 years. It's mine. Amalei ana b'shchuna gavai. He says no. I was in the inside of the house. Ana b'shchuna gavai. I was in the inner parts of the house. And this is the way Rashbam explains it. I was passing through your part, and I was using the outer part of the house, which you were living in with my permission. So that's why I didn't object, because I was allowing you to use that portion of the house. But it doesn't mean that it's yours. I was living in the inner part. Asla Kami to Rav Nachman. So he came to Rav Nachman. So they came to Rav Nachman. Amar Rav Nachman says to the person who was living in the outer part of the house, hold on. So he comes to that person. He says, hold on one second. Amar Zil beror achilatcha. So he says, so if now comes to the person who's living in the outer part of the house, and he says, go and prove through witnesses that indeed you lived in this house 3 years by yourself, which would be an actual chazaka, and that nobody else was living there with you. You have to prove that. So Amrway, Rava. So Rava says, but why? Achidina, why? This guy's living there now, and this other one says, I was also living there at the same time, and you don't have a chazaka. He should be the one to have to bring the proof, because the burden of proof rests on the person who wants to take something away from somebody else. So we'll stop the recording here, but we'll go on a few more minutes because this is the daf for today, but we'll keep going on.